Sehr verehrte Anwesende, liebe Zuschauerinnen und Zuschauer auf unserem kleinen Videokanal. Ich habe die große Freude, Ihnen heute die Kollegin Na Li vorzustellen, die uns einen Vortrag halten wird, der einerseits ihr neues Buch uns vorstellt, Public History in China, das dieser Tage bei De Gruyter in Boston und Berlin erschienen ist und zugleich aber auch uns in einem ganz bestimmten Segment dieser chinesischen Public History zeigen wird, was das Spezielle ist, was also vielleicht auch die Unterschiede herstellt zu Public History Kulturen andernorts. Und dieses Segment ist die Museumskultur in China in der Gegenwart und in ihrer Entstehung in den letzten Jahrzehnten. Ich darf Ihnen Frau Na Li kurz vorstellen. Frau Na Li hat ihren Doktortitel erworben an der University of Toronto in Kanada, und zwar an einer Schnittstelle von Public History Studies und Stadtplanungswissenschaft. Ja, das ist eine Kombination, die gut geht und die immer auch sehr vielversprechend ist. Dementsprechend hat sie dann auch ihr erstes Buch, nämlich ihre PhD-Studien, 2015 an der University of Toronto Press publiziert unter dem Titel Kensington Market, Collective Memory, Public History and Toronto's Urban Landscape. Seitdem hat sie 2 weitere wichtige Bücher publiziert und sie ist, das wird man sicherlich sagen kann, eine der ganz wesentlichen Figuren der Public History in China, die seit Jahren daran arbeitet, diesen Ansatz also auch an den chinesischen Universitäten zu etablieren. Von 2012 bis 2017 hat sie gearbeitet als Research Fellow und University Teacher an der jetzt, ich kann es sicherlich nicht gut aussprechen, an der Chongqing University. Ja, nächstes Mal mache ich ein Sprachtraining. Von 2017 bis 2022 an der Zhejiang University und seit 2022 ist sie zum einen Professor an der East China Normal University und lebt und arbeitet für ein Forschungsprojekt in San Francisco. Von dort ist sie heute auch zugeschaltet und zugleich ist sie seit Oktober diesen Jahres und noch bis Herbst nächsten Jahres Gastwissenschaftlerin an unserem Fakultätszentrum für transdisziplinäre historisch-kulturwissenschaftliche Studien. Ich bin sehr froh, dass sie heute da ist. Sie wird nach der kurzen Vorstellung ihres Buches wird es eine Pause geben, wo Sie Fragen an die Kollegin stellen können. Dann spricht sie über die Museen und dann können Sie wieder Fragen an die Kollegin stellen. Die Fragen und Antworten werden nicht mitgeschnitten, also sind da ganz frei und müssen keine falschen Zurückhaltung haben. So, das wäre es von meiner Seite. Liebe Lina, now it's your turn. Und ich gehe aus dem Bild.
Okay, thank you, Marco. Thank you, everybody. Good evening, Vienna. A few weeks back, I was just there for the second Public History Weekly conference. I was walking along the back alleys and taking public transportation, witnessing historic architectures, museum, historic sites, and all of that. So most important, I was very struck by how history is preserved in a public space and in the lower scale neighborhoods, in vernacular architecture, and at the community level. So almost 20 years ago, I traveled to major historic cities around the world to search for the surviving urban landscapes. I was wondering at the time if comparing historic preservation practices, museums and historic sites in different places, logics and patterns would emerge for better alternatives to urban destruction under the name of modernity. It was in Europe, actually, the journey was started. So for many places, even in Asia, especially in China, where I was born and grew up, I arrived too late even to appreciate some of the most historical and architectural wonders. However, a few days in Vienna, my passion for public history and urban preservation was revived. Fast forward to 10 years ago, in May 2013, I met one of the independent documentary filmmaker go by the name of Wu Wenguang in China. He started the Vernacular Memory Plan and Grassroots Studio projects in 2011, integrating visuals and sounds into memories. Mr. Wu's projects document the history of Great Famine from 1959 to 1961. Around 20 participants. We have villagers, innovative documentary filmmakers, and volunteering students were actively involved. So the journey of recording and documenting individual memories and stories through visuals gradually become a quest for a renewed and alternative understanding of history. I was actually surprised about his passion for documenting and vernacular memory of a still sensitive part of public history, of Chinese history. Later that year, I was sitting at the public history conference held in Suzhou. The public, I was observing quietly and listening attentively. The public, mostly local residents and history lovers, came to present and discuss a wide range of historic issues. Emotions were high, and my heart was stirred. For some reason, British historian Raphael Samuel's words came to my mind. History is not the prerogative of a historian. It is rather a social form of knowledge. Uh, the work in getting in any given instance was a work of 1,000 different hands. How come such an exciting social form of knowledge so steeped in popular memory in China remains an intellectual blind spot? I decided to write a book because these stories need telling. So the idea was conceived at Suzhou conference, and public history, as Marco just mentioned, had become a major focus of my work since then. Writing it has been quite a journey. It was in many ways a culmination of the past 10 years of my life and also my effort to really understand public history in China and to engage genuine public debates, dialogues, and to establish public history as a discipline at the university and the college level across the country. So most important is it involves a lot of conversations with historians, public history educators, and the museum professionals, and the most important, an educated and concerned public. In many ways, that was like exciting process, and today I'm really excited to share with you that passion and that journey. So I will start from an overview of the book that Marco just mentioned, and also focus on the museum projects and also the intricate relationship between museums and public history, and we'll take breaks in between, and we'll end with the questions and answer period. So um, here I'm going to just share slides with you. Uh, and I hope this can translate really well. Okay. So, okay, so so the book take on I'll start with the seeing history, public history in China was really exciting. It was just released a few days ago. So the book takes you and the reader on the journey through public history in China. And for some of you, probably know a little bit in that part of the world, during the first 2 decades of the 21st century, public history has found expression in everyday life in Chinese, ordinary Chinese people. Like we have old photographs, family ephemerals, spontaneous memorials, oral histories, and historic reenactment, and historic video games, and all of that. At first glance, these avocational passions seem to be more than just a passing fad, as long as we view them as isolated passions or evidence of change. So we continue to miss a larger picture. At the most immediate level, just like in Europe, we see media technologies visibly order the scale and the manner of how ordinary Chinese people start to access information about the past. It also makes it possible to construct a diverse range of community, physical or virtual. I see um, the traditional history in China has gradually become a little distant and irrelevant. And by contrast, we see public history seems immediate and interesting. So we see a lot of people explain this as just the technology, but I feel there's something is missing. And how is it possible that a more professionally trained historians are losing ground to an avocational public? And I'm not asking this question to attack Chinese historians, but to bring one fact into sharper focus. We see there's a progressively blurring line between the production and consumption of history, which has long separated producers and consumer of the historic knowledge in China. So this book essentially was arguing that public history represents more than just a research domain or within history or within any existing discipline, nor does it fit into any established narratives, but rather it is represents a fundamental change of the entire process of history making in China. And in this process, I was trying to make a case that the work we should really take a system view of public history making, and what I call public history, history plus ing, and it was really a complex adaptive system. So here, um, for some of you already understand public history was born in the United States professionally as within the history department. So an idea born in the 1970s out of a job crisis in a Western country may seem inadequate to really encapsulate the public histories in a variety of historic contexts in the 21st century. So about 40 some years later, after the birth of public history in the United States, I met Wesley Johnson, one of the founding fathers of the public history in the States, at the National Council on Public History annual conference in Las Vegas. He was impressed with the booming public histories in China and delighted to see, as you see here, is the Public History, our first national journal of public history in Chinese language, and an inaugural issue of Public History. This journal, I defined the public history as an audience-centered historic practice that focus on an issue and demands of the public in the contemporary world. And in public history, historians work with the public to build the past into history. So my effort to define this very field involves a very different purpose. I try to define it and try to see through the various phenomena discussed in this book under the umbrella of public history. So modern public history at its core is not a noun, it's a verb in present tense. It means history, historing, ing, in the public sphere. It provokes, it critiques, and it's contextual, and it's national, it's global. So that's something methodologically, and we see public history is best understood through particular examples in a particular settings. Early in my work in Kensington Market in Toronto, as Marco just mentioned in the introduction, I became fascinated with the public history perspective in understanding urban landscapes in one of the oldest and Jewish neighborhood in the city of Toronto. And as a young urban planning scholar, I realized that there's something inadequate with the traditional approach to planning um, the cities, and I walked through the narrow streets and talking with the residents from a variety of ethnic neighborhoods, and I invited them to share their stories and to help us better preserve urban built environments that truly matters to them. And I proposed a culturally sensitive narrative approach in which a shared authority, which is a key concept later I learned in public history, lies at the core. And so when the residents of the Kensington Market urged me to publish my study as a book, I realized that my work had found a place in a major Canadian metropolis well known for its ethnic diversity and desire to preserve such an urban neighborhood. And I'm not sure how such work will translate it into other contexts, but definitely it motivates me to further explore how critical urban preservation sort of like happens at a particular time. And if you take a public history perspective, you're going to see and interpret historic landscape in a very different way. And similar to cities, I see public history takes place in a dynamic and network space. So in which I see all the intricate relationships sort of connected with the different aspects of the public history. As you see the cover of my book, you'll see the public history like a house, you know, if you open one door, you're going to lead into a different perspectives, you know, and different understanding of history. That's the beauty of public history. It's complex, it's active, it's proactive, and the making of history reveals the complexity, the very psychological and physical complexity of public history. And in a way, it's self-generative and interactive. So this is what I call a new structure of history uh, making in China. And despite its geographical focus, it's a book about public history in China, and it's evolved with conversations with the public historians and public history educators, and also practitioners, and most important, the public across many cities in China and globally. And maybe that's actually reflected a shift of the nature of public history in the last 20 years. It started from a very nation state focused discipline, history driven, and gradually it becomes into a global phenomena. That's why we're like excited to be part of this global dialogue. So we'll start. So the first part of the book, here's basically like a rundown, a breakdown of the book. And so I started from the origin of modern public history in China, as you know, it happens in all the places. Public history usually evolves, you know, from a quintessential and unique cultural tradition. So in this part, I actually trace the origin of modern public history, you know, from the late Qing dynasty to all the way to the People's Republic era. And for one thing, it maps the public history landscapes with a series of case studies, as you see here, in a different represents 8 chapters that actually sort of gives you the background and also the origin of where those are from. And these are emergent practices we see an ever expanding space of possibilities outside the established categories of disciplinary boundaries. And so with that, I go to the part 2. Essentially, is the past making the present. Presentations and patterns presents various aspects of public histories at a different scales, as you can see here, including historic consciousness, oral history, family history, public environmental history, museum interpretation, historic performance, and reenactment, historic video games, and history educations. So the 8 chapters here, each all project-based and context-dependent, ranging widely in a different area, but united amidst a specific theme and pattern of public history making. And so it will kind of lead readers to a more complicated understanding of the past and present. And all chapters involves in all the extensive archival research and field work and specific sites and interpretation. And also, I have worked with the public historians, museum curators, archivists, heritage professionals, and archaeologists, urban planners, documentary filmmakers, history reenactors, and history educators on the ground across China. So the applied level of history making often involves a substantial amount of practical experience. So I can write and research with a better confidence. So here, I'm going to just give you a quick overview of each chapter, and then we're going to focus on the museum and the public project. And so we'll see the first chapter, which is actually the exploring to the historic consciousness of ordinary Chinese. And it essentially discussed the project we call Chinese and the Past project, always exploring the material and narrative and didactic and a moral genre of historic consciousness of ordinary Chinese. The project takes a survey, but the sample is regional. I started from Chongqing, where I was working as a professor at the Institute for Historic Research with Chongqing University. Essentially, is trying to probe into the attitude of a cross-section of the ordinary Chinese. And so it carries out the regional scale, and I understand the results is kind of inclusive, but the preliminary findings give me some confidence to take on the various projects discussed later in this book. So first, I see material culture stands out. So place and sites of public history, museums being one of them, they actually propose the material and the rhetoric and the rhetoric for discussing public history instead of the textual context. And second, there's a strong push in China to really go into personal, family, and local history. So, and the last part is that the public actually respects the institutional and the professional authority. And so they're not really necessarily against the professional history. Instead, they try to interact, they try to understand the professional historians and their work. And the second chapter goes to oral history. Is this probably being one of the most popular form of public history in China so far is oral history. And in that chapter, I did an extensive archival research and also the actual field work. So it surveys the landscape of oral history and addresses the two key concepts and ideas in public history, which fleshes out in later chapters. First, why has oral history become popular at such a scope and intensity? And second, how does oral history influence a history conscious of a cross-section of ordinary Chinese? So in this idea, I actually differentiate the different concept of oral history. And later, I did an interview with the Oral History Association just to flesh out some of the key ideas there. And follow up the oral history, I go to the third chapter is about the family history at the crossroads, family narratives, personal memory, how does that become part of the public history. And the fourth chapter and the fifth one, they discuss the different types of museums in China. And one is about museum and the public, which I did when I was in Chongqing. And another one is about the environmental history goes public, which is a different types of museum. And we involve the very different types of a few projects. But collectively, those two chapters gives you kind of an idea what museum has evolved in the last 20 years or so, which I'll touch upon a little later after the break. And the seventh and eighth chapter actually goes to a very different kinds of history, which were sort of undocumented and the traditional history textbooks and research. So performing history, culture, memory in the present explores the cultural impulse behind such a diverse range of historic performances. And it's interesting dialogues and conversations with a lot of historical reenactors, across China, all self-funded and all like self-motivated grassroots organizations, but deeply popular. And I see performing history as a form of public history constitutes a conscious experience and affects historic consciousness and shape public memories. There are challenges in the censored political climate, but it presents some kind of exciting potential for a new kind of a historiography. And the followed by historic video games as the participatory public history. And this part essentially involves a lot of students who are actually working and playing video games. And so we can try to dig out the methodological value and the pedagogical virtue of the counterfactual history thinking and the capability of shaping history consciousness digitally and collectively. So those are the forms of a different kinds of public histories. And so what connects them? And across those first seven chapters, and I see public history is socially grounded, and the knowledge of public history is tacit, precisely because the re-engineering of the social bond in a perpetually novel system. So not only has the nature of the historic knowledge changed, so too has the way to acquire such a knowledge. So you go to chapter 8, you will find the pedagogical potential public history. And starting from the traditional history education, what is wrong with that? And then we go into, how public history can contribute to some of the key concepts such as history thinking, methodology, and professional ethics. And I provided a detailed analysis of the 3 national public history faculty training programs that I did in the last years when I was working in China, and suggest that public history has a potential for cultivating a kind of new kind of a history thinking. And I argue in that chapter will direct the future of teaching the past. And part 3, you will have the new idea, which actually ends the book from where I started, about the presumption, the idea, the blurring line between the production and consumption. So it's sort of like a thematic convergence of the whole book. And so this part try to ties those threads running through the different kind of phenomena and try to see through them with the idea of public history and explain this new model of history thinking and history making. So with a system view of public history, with history making, and we start to see how the various phenomena really can be traced back to the unique and quintessentially Chinese tradition, but it also reveals the cultural anxiety and fills an emotional void. It's unnecessary. It's necessary. And so, in a way, in contemporary China, so paradoxically, today in China, a lot of scholars and professionals were yet to fully comprehend such a complexity. But hopefully this book will provide some fresh insights, and so collectively we'll be working a new structure with the idea of presumption, with a revolutionary media technology, with a historically conscious Chinese public, and collectively we're envisioning a future of the past. So basically that's what this book is all about. Okay, so we'll move on to one of the chapters in my book, which is a significant part of my work in China in the last 10 years, is working with the museum professionals. I'll start with a story. It was like back in 2013, as part of our first national public history faculty training program, we organized a trip to a Nanjing Massacre Memorial Hall with the groups from Princeton University. So the experience sort of like, provoked an cross-cultural debates, and also my further thoughts on how museums, especially historic sites, like contested historic sites, such as Nanjing Massacre Museum and memorials, can play a role in the public history in China. So for some of you know that the site, essentially the museum, they call it, they combine the museum and the memorials. So the site commemorates the Japanese invasion of Nanjing in 1937, and commonly known as the Nanjing Massacre, or in the West known as the Rape of Nanking. So during which Japanese troops massacred about 300,000 Chinese from December 1937 through February 1938. So for Chinese, the Nanjing Massacre remains a national symbol of China's victimization by Japanese aggression, and an ongoing source of conflicts between China and Japan. So every single detail, as you will see in the memorial hall, from design to the exhibits to a graphic display and actual bones of the victims. And so it's all like through like this ideological bomb upon we call evil Japanese. Okay, so lumping those gruesome details together may create an emotional memorial, but sometimes it's sort of like confused rather than illuminates why this massive human-made atrocity actually happened, and how it has been used and abused, and also the actual impact on ordinary Chinese and Japanese. So my question is, I designed this trip as part of our faculty training with an idea about the possibility of some kind of shared historic understanding that transcends national borders, national boundaries, and possibly other faulty lines. So places as controversial, traumatic, and highly political as Nanjing Massacre Memorial Hall should provide such an opportunity. So as you can see here, those are the actual bones of the victims displayed in the exhibit hall. So for Chinese, these were artifacts, forensic evidence of that proof the Nanjing Massacre actually happened, and despite the denials from Japanese from time to time. But for Americans, because our training programs involving another group of students and faculty members from Princeton University in the United States, so for the Americans or people without Chinese background, let's put it this way, the display of human remains constitutes the disrespect for the dead. Okay, so in a group, if I did this training program with only Chinese visitors, only Chinese professors, with a same and emotional assumption of a shared community, the issue of debate would never even have been raised, but it has become a source of conflict and misunderstanding in the transnational dialogue of certain parts of history. It's kind of buried, but it's provoked through this cross-cultural background. As you can see, there's a heated debate on the bus tour from Nanjing back to Shanghai, where the training program took place. So we had this really difficult discussions, but it's in a way, in retrospect, it's very healthy in a way, to see how museums became such a source of public controversy, and it still carries our discussions and understanding of history even after such 70 some years time lapse. But anyways, so that actually provoked my thoughts and work on the field, on the ground with Chinese museum professionals. As you can see, in the past 100 years, it's been a very complex and sometimes contradictory for Chinese museums. And I did the survey. So the numbers and kinds of museum and expanded and contracted depend on the political climate. So essentially, this you will see the first public museums, because the museums in China started from the private collections and and very upscale, and also this Western-minded scholars and officials, they brought those ideas back from the West back to China, and the first the public museum as Nantong Museum. So you will see how interesting that the museums in China is always closely associated with nationalism and ideological nation building. However, in the first 20th century, technology has changed how people access information, as I mentioned earlier. So the concept of public and history has already changed. So the tension between the government-controlled cultural enterprise and the public consumption or presumption of history fluctuates. So here, the analysis essentially brings the idea of a public and history, and also the evolving relationship between museum and their publics in the contemporary China. So the projects that I did with this museum, we call Museum and the Public. So this is the urban landscape and memory projects. Okay, so this is when I was working as a professor in Chongqing University back in 2015. We had an institutional collaboration between my university and Chongqing Three Gorges Museum. Or one of the biggest and prominent urban museums in China. So the project I used interview survey as the key methodology, and involving 20-some students exploring how public interpret history and landscapes of a city of Chongqing through the exhibits, just because the museum was one of the key platform for public to really learn about the urban history of a city, and if and how the exhibits reflect their memories. And the last part of the study raised some possibilities. As I said, this is an institutional collaboration, so we're lucky to get the funding to really carry through a 3-year project. And so idea was to incorporating some kind of multiple perspectives into museum redesign. So, visitor studies is nothing new in China, and this project's introduced for the very first time introduced the idea of public history and the methodology of public history, understanding the museum exhibit interpretation. Just give you a little bit background interpretation, we call museum interpretation, and does not really exist in China. They go from archive collections all the way to exhibition. So what public history contributes to the whole process is we try to interpret the artifacts, the objects, and all of that from and with the public, and then try to incorporate their voices into the museum redesign. So here's to just give you a little like geographic idea and sense of where Chongqing is. You will see it's like along the Yangtze River. So the project started during the conversation actually about the redesign of they call it Journey Towards the City, which is the name of the exhibit. So a redesign between me and the curators with the museum back in 2015. So public history was, they've never heard of that, was a novel idea to attract the attention of the leadership. So ideally, I got the leadership support from the leadership and the resources and institutional support from the leadership to really get involved in the redesign. So this is what I give you an idea is that Journey Towards the City, sort of like the key, one of the key, permanent exhibition. It presents the panoramic view of how Chongqing evolved from a small town into a vibrant municipality. This is the fourth municipalities in China. And so as a background, the capital of the Kingdom of Ba during the Zhou dynasty, and Chongqing became a regional political and military center after 3016 BC and evolved all the way. It was not until 1929 that Chongqing officially obtained the city status. And in 1937, during the 1930s war with Japan, the capital Nanjing fell and became a seat of collaborationist government. And then all the way evolved on November 30th, 1939, the new Communist Party took over Chongqing. So you will see this exhibit in trying to interpret the tumultuous history as a wartime capital of Chongqing during the war, and also the revolutionary era identity as in the public space. You see a little bit landscape here of a city, and this is kind of the idea. We have the museum and the cultural landscapes at the front. This is just a facade and of the museum, just give you some kind of idea, and how we're trying to balance public history and to try to balance the political requirement for the city history and also the public participation. So we did the training. So here you can see we have the some of the students, but most of them are professional museum professionals from the different departments in the museums. Some of them include very higher up leaderships here. So we did the training session on what is public history, how we're going to interpret objects, and also we try to involve all the exhibit designers from the museums to try to walk through on the ground what is wrong with the current permanent exhibits and how we're going to incorporate the public voices. So there are different concerns because there's some conservative groups, they don't want to change. They feel this is fine, this is what we've been doing for years. And there are another group of people, as you can see from the faces here, they're young, innovative, and they represent something, feel we can do better than just presenting the chronology of a city to the public, and we would like to see the visitor engaged in interpreting the public and the objects. Well, actually, some of the residents donated their family letters and objects to the museum, but you've never got a chance to really interact with the museum professionals and being part of the what we call the urban landscapes and memories. So what we did during the this 3 sessions of training is try to get the idea of public history. We foreground that idea and say, you know, we're going to interview people, the residents, the visitors, and get their voices into the exhibits. So the idea here is that we try to struggle with the authenticity as historians. I always feel we no matter how many voices, we still try to get down to the truth of, you know, the historic details. It's not only just the factual details of a historic urban evolution, but also how the ordinary people's life, their memories, how to build their life into what we call the urban history and landscapes. So we interviewed on the ground the people. I trained students and the professionals the basic techniques of the oral histories and interview surveys on the ground. So we heard a very different voices from the visitors and the residents and how they interpret this specific part of the uh, urban evolution of a city. So part of the exhibit actually presents a war with Japan in the ideological bias light. So in our project, we actually talking with those who actually going through going through the bombing and also the wartime real life, and they still have family members and photographs, and we try to bring them together and into this open and complex and uncertain historic interpretation. So you will see a very conflicting perspectives into the same process of exploring the idea of authenticity. And another part is exhibit design and redesign. And how to present that in a comfortable light to really understand the public's voice into the public space. So here just shows one example. This is the kind of idea, use the different lighting system to really go through how people really experience their daily life during the air bombing and during the war. And so we actually put the different panels and also the multimedia panels right next to us, because this was the initial ones. You will see it's very political, and it's almost like a way of showing, oh, we're very heroic, we went through this together. However, when you go to talk to people who actually been through all those air bombing, and they have a very different things, and you know they they have a different voices and say it's not really that heroic. We hate it. We just try to survive and the daily life. So we incorporate the oral history voices as a kind of multimedia presentation to compensate this grand narratives of heroic and of urban evolution, which sort of give a different taste and different glimpse into the urban landscapes, and the visitors are really involved in this, and the residents are really involved in this. We can't really present everything just due to the political climate. However, we did get the chance to really incorporate some voices that gives me more confidence how technology and access to information can really change the whole landscapes of museum professionals. And so, and again, for all the museums, I really get encouraged through these projects. And so it's very significant because this is the first time that a comprehensive museum in a politically censored environment that sort of like open to the possibility of public history. And so, and the idea is very urban oriented. It's about urban landscape history and the political memories. So the scale and the location of the museum, and also the exhibition sort of presents a lot of challenges. But I do feel there are three like visions that I can share with you through this project. And one is that this is the first time that we see the positive interaction between public history and museum professionals. And both were imported from the West, and both have struggled to survive and thrive in a Chinese setting. And the collaboration is challenging, but it's positive. And, as long as you have the institutional support from the leadership. And the second part is that I see the visitor survey needs to incorporate public history as both the idea and also the methodology. And I see interpretation is hugely important in so this is where public history as a field can really help to really understand. You not only go to the archives, go to the objects, but you need to interpret them. You need the rigorous interpretive planning to really pull them together to do an exhibit that will work for the public and with the public. And so this is just one of many history museum projects I've been doing on the ground with across many cities. I've been working with other private museums and also other types of museums, such as the Xihu Museum and Westlake Museum in Hangzhou, and also private museums, sensitive ones and less sensitive ones. But working with the professional museum professionals on the ground gives me a lot of confidence about public history can do with with our a political attitude, with a sensitive attitude, and you work with the public. And so that's probably where the future of the past of interpreting and preserving preservation in China should go. Okay, so with that, I'm going to end with my presentation about seeing history, public history in China. And I'm very excited to share this journey and this book with you. And if you're interested in any other chapters and or any other aspects of public history in China, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you have.